And thanks very much for inviting us, Liz. And it's fantastic to see so many people here who are interested in such an important topic. And you're absolutely spot on it being about a journey that and a dialogue that you need to go through in terms of what ethical behaviour actually means. It's a very dynamic process. What drew me to ethical behaviour and ethical leadership in particular is, my background is very much in leadership development. And a number of years ago, I started using the Hogan Development Survey, which some of you will be familiar with, which is obviously a diagnostic that explores the dark side of leadership. And this is when a behaviour that's normally a strength for a leader, actually under pressure or because they feel stressed, they might overplay that strength. So for example, they might normally be very confident and articulate, but under pressure, that confidence might turn into arrogance, and they stop being able to hear, feedback from other people. And that obviously has a knock-on effect on being able to behave in an ethical way, because it's those sorts of challenges that actually do cause stress and anxiety and pressure. And so I decided to focus on that for my doctorate, and particularly to look at the squeezed middle. So the people that are in the middle of this tension between, senior leaders, executives, and people who, are more on the front line. Because as Liz said, doing the right thing is not straightforward. We think it's easy to say, oh yeah, I'm going to do the right thing, but it's very messy and it can be very ambiguous, and there are, multiple right answers. So I'm really interested tonight to hear about your experience. You guys are out there, dealing with this on a day-to-day basis. So it'll be fascinating to hear about your experiences.
Brilliant. Well, you've got me there. When you talk about the dark side, that pulls me in and intrigues me straight away. So thanks for that, Caroline. And Nicola, say a little bit briefly about what's brought you to the session.
Thanks, Liz. I've worked in HR and OD for 15 years or more, and I've really seen the impact of unethical behaviour on kind of people processes and employee experience. And for me, that's where there's an opportunity for us in OD to really make a difference. If we can help organisations to make those processes work better, to not unintentionally incentivise unethical behaviour, then, that's where we can really make a difference. So for me, that's where I've really got interested in this. I'd love to try and help organisations look through that lens of ethics at some of these really, really significant processes that ultimately determine how people feel in the workplace and will determine whether they think an organisation is ethical or not. There was a piece of research done recently by the Bright Network, and they suggested that a significant number of students will look at, the ethical credentials of an organisation before making a decision about working there. So if you're thinking about, employing and attracting that next generation of workers, ethics is going to be, it needs to be a priority when we're thinking about how we're going to attract those people into different workplaces.
Brilliant. I read something yesterday from a global Deloitte survey also saying that for millennials and for Gen Z, absolutely, if there's not a match with their personal values and organisational values, even though they feel very uncertain about their careers at the moment, that's an overriding factor for them. So really interesting. Okay, so we're going to talk about what constitutes an ethical behaviour, the role of HR and OD in kind of then tackling that behaviour, and then we will talk about some kind of practical tools and tips that people can use and give you a bit of chance to have a think about that. We are going to be using Mentimeter, so we put the smart code up there and also the link to menti.com if you want to log in now and get ready for when we move to the questions around that. Right, I'll hand back to you, Caroline.
Okay, well, actually, we are going to start with the poll. So if everyone can use either log in, open up another window on your laptop or iPad and get into menti.com, or use the QR code that, as Liz said, is on the screen to take you in, because what we want to ask you is, do you apply the same ethical standards at work as you do at home? So do you apply the same ethical standards at work as you do at home? And we want to know whether you always do that, whether you usually, sometimes, rarely, or never do that. So it looks like they're saying, oh, no, another vote came in there. It's like strictly, isn't it? It's like strictly. Well, as we're in the interest of time, and as people are probably still, there might still be a few more votes, but this is really interesting because this really follows what we have seen when we've asked this question before, and what the research tells us. What's really interesting is that people generally say that they usually follow the same ethical standards or apply the same ethical standards at work as they do at home. However, it's not actually as clear-cut as that. The research actually shows that most of us actually have a different set of ethics that we apply between home and work. And it's complicated because, and I think this really illustrates how this area is something that needs a lot of thought and people to really think about, because often our intention is to be ethical and to apply the same principles, but our ethics are challenged on a daily basis, and it means that some of us are actually not really willing to truly stick to the ethical standards we say we believe in and we say we want to. Even people who really want to do good, quite often, and I'm not naming any names here, but quite often they give themselves permission to be bad. So it might just be worth your while thinking about as we go through the session, when has that happened to you? When have you intended to do something, but then actually when it's come to it, it's been too difficult or too challenging? So thank you for that, and I'm sure we'll share the results, won't we, Liz? And I'm just going to go back to
so yeah, people could see the results on the screen as we were talking. I have left the poll open, so if you still want to vote, continue to do that, and maybe we could go back and have another look at the end. Yeah,
see if anything's changed. So okay, so I'm just going to spend a few minutes now setting the scene in terms of some thoughts around ethical leadership to help you. And then, as Liz said, we're going to move into a couple of exercises where we'll put you into breakout groups where you'll get a chance to discuss some of these things. And then we're going to finish with some questions at the end. This diagram, I think, illustrates, one of the great things about working in the HR and OD world is that you get to look across the organisation and you get involved in processes and activities that involve the whole organisation. And we know that ethical behaviour impacts almost every aspect of an organisation. I don't think we could think of an area where it doesn't. But this diagram really tries to show, what are some of the root causes? Where does ethical behaviour, start and finish? So beliefs and values, as you probably won't be surprised, are what drives ethical behaviour. And the culture and climate that is created in an organisation is really created by the leadership behaviour that people observe, what's going on a day-to-day basis and how leaders actually act. And of course, the way leaders behave determines the extent to which employees feel engaged and the extent to which they might feel that they can behave in an ethical way. They might be incentivized to behave ethically. And of course, if people are behaving ethically and are engaged, then that usually drives customer satisfaction and an identity of an organization, which obviously leads to stakeholder value. And then obviously, if an organisation is succeeding and behaving in an ethical way, then generally the communities around it will benefit as well. So what you're working on from an OD perspective is very connected to what's going on a much wider basis. So one of the things that we know sometimes organisations can struggle with, and especially in the OD area, is how do I get line managers interested in this thing? Because it can feel a bit difficult to get hold of, and it can feel, you know, it's in the too hard box. But there's a lot of research now coming out that shows how important ethical behaviour is, and Liz mentioned it in her introduction, that, you know, it's something that's very, very current. So we've got some facts and figures for you here, and if you had time to complete the pre-reading or listen to the podcast, I think this will have given you some really good background to, you know, where the thinking is, you know, particularly from the CIPD perspective around ethical behaviour. So some of you might know some of these this already, but essentially the Institute of Business Ethics found that 33% of people, when asked how ethically does British business behave, they responded either not very or not at all ethically, which is, I find, incredibly worrying. And the CIPD survey in 2018 found that 31% of people said that managers in their organisation had behaved in an unethical manner. And this ties into the dark side behaviour because Robert Hare, some of you might be familiar with him, he's a criminal psychologist, said, you know, not all psychopaths are in prison. Some of them are in the boardroom. And I think that we've seen some of that behaviour over the last few years. So one of the things that I think is really interesting from the point of view of OD is that 28% of people have said that they have had situations where they have had a serious conflict with their professional beliefs or standards. And I think that this is a great opportunity for people to have a safe space to be able to talk those things through. But there is some good news, because actually being a more ethical organisation really does pay off. The organisation Ethisphere tracks organisations that have adopted ethical and sustainable practices, and found that they generally outperform by 13.5% other organisations that haven't chosen to follow those ethical practices. So good ethics do mean good business. So that's very reassuring. We've got another question for you now. So if you'd like to go back into Mentimeter, and what does ethical mean to you? So yeah, so if you can go back into Mentimeter, we're going to do a word cloud, and we'd like you to just jot down the verbs or the adjectives or whatever comes to mind when we ask you that question. What does ethical mean to you? And I'll stop my share now, and then Liz will be able to show us the results.
Okay, so you should be able to type in multiple words to this. So we've given you a number of options because we realise that it might not be a simple one-word answer. So we'll just give people a few moments to start entering some information in and have a look at where we get to. Okay. So I think this will keep evolving for a bit, but I'm wondering, do you want to comment briefly, Caroline, before we go into the breakouts?
Yeah, I do. Really, really interesting. So I've noticed that some of the words that we generally see are coming up, but there's some really interesting other words as well. So the sort of words we generally hear are things like fairness, trust, honesty, courage. I noticed that one of the words somebody had written was consistent and openness. And I can see that, you know, there's some other stuff around, you know, doing what you say you'll do, what you say you're going to do, or being, you know, consistent in that way. One of the things that's really interesting about this activity, and the reason why we wanted you to do it, is that being ethical is a concept in that it's quite difficult to get hold of it, and by using this sort of more specific language, we can get people to really think about what it means to them in practical terms. So one of the things that sometimes come up is people will say, well, it's what I was brought up to believe. I'll stick with what I was, you know, brought up to believe. But some people have used phrases like, well, I'll think about what my role model would do. So, you know, what would a role model in this would do? And is it good for everybody? And one thing that somebody said to me a little while ago was, well, I think to myself, this is a chief executive that I work with, said, I wonder, could I read it in a headline about myself? So being ethical to them is, would I be happy for it to be, you know, splashed across the front page? So there are multiple paths to being ethical, and it's a very challenging approach. And I'm going to hand over to Nicola now, I'm going to reshare the screen, and she's going to talk you through how we can take that more practical, pragmatic approach.
Yeah. Thanks, Caroline. I mean, like you say, it is a really hard thing to get your kind of arms around, because it means different things to different people. You know, so we've got that concept that people look at it and see something different. And then, you know, we know that organisations are becoming more complex, more ambiguous, more challenging to navigate. So it's very unlikely that there will be a kind of very clear pathway between what's the right decision, what's the wrong decision, etc. But I think what this concept of moments that matter can do is kind of bring it into the reality and really anchor it into something real. People might have heard of this moments that matter concept. It's used widely across a number of different topics and subjects. But it's this concept of, you know, writing, micro interaction, micro experience that was particularly memorable, important, that it, you know, it kind of triggered a significant emotional reaction. And I think if we can really reflect on those moments that matter, or be more aware of when they occur, and perhaps unpack them, think about, you know, what was the meaning within them, where was the challenge, where did that say? I think this can be a really helpful way of kind of anchoring ethics in the reality and trying to bring about some kind of consistent language and understanding of what that means for people. So as I say, we will share the slides. I'm not going to read out all of those pointers there, but if we could go to the next slide, Liz.
Sorry.
Oh, is that you, Caroline? Sorry.
Yeah, it's me.
So what we'd like to do now is just to get you to work in groups and start to have a bit more of a think of what constitutes unethical behaviour and what contributes to that, and thinking about, was there a moment that mattered in your experience that really highlights that to you? I mean, sharing a particular example of my own, I was leading on performance management for a large organisation, and I was kind of suspicious that the process was not working in favour for significant numbers of what you might call people in minority groups, people who are working part-time, people from various different groups that were not necessarily in those kind of front-facing, very exciting types of roles. I commissioned a piece of research to investigate that, and as I suspected, it came back that it was actually disadvantaging large groups of people, quite unintentionally. Nobody had set that process up to set out to disadvantage certain groups, but that was what was happening. And so for me, that was a moment, you know, I had that data then to use as leverage to try and convince more senior decision makers, senior stakeholders, that that process needed more attention, because actually what it was doing was driving people's beliefs that the organisation was unethical because of the way that people were experiencing that process. So quite unintentional, as I say, nobody set out to do that, but being an OD, that was a really great opportunity to make a practical change that helped to make that process work better for people, give people a better experience, and feel that the organisation was therefore acting more ethically.
Right.
So we'd like to break you into groups. Oh, sorry, Liz.
No, just going to say great, thanks for that.
So we'd like to break you into groups now, and having a think about the first two ideas. So what constitutes unethical behaviour and what contributes to it, intentionally or not? And then how have you experienced unethical behaviour in relation to specifically to your OD work? And what, if anything, did you do about it? So I think we've got 12 minutes, have we, Liz, for this?
Probably just under. I think we're running a little bit over. I would encourage people to pop the cameras on in the rooms, please, if you're able to, so that you can really engage in the discussion. So about 10 minutes or so to discuss those two areas, and then we'll bring you back into plenary. Thanks, everybody. Welcome back from the breakouts, everybody. Everyone's coming back now.
Hi, everyone.
I think we've got everyone back.
Okay, I hope you found that a useful discussion. I wondered whether we might hear, Caroline, did you join one of the groups? I wonder if we might hear back.
I did, and I just in the last 50 seconds had time to say, is it okay if I share these 2 or 3 things? So yeah, we had a really interesting discussion, although it went like that really quick. So there were a couple of things that came up in our group. I mean, Barbara used a phrase, flagrant disregard of standards, and I think I can really identify with that. It's sometimes quite shocking, isn't it, to actually see people who you think would actually stick to the rules, if you like, but for some reason they justify to themselves that they don't need to do that for whatever reason. We also Katie talked about the fact that sometimes when you see an organisation from the outside, it might look ethical or unethical, but when you actually get into the organisation and experience it on the ground, it can be very different. And that one of the things that she's decided to do is actually take a kind of step-by-step approach, a day-by-day approach. You know, if she can make a difference in her space on a day-to-day basis, then that's got to be a good thing in terms of moving the organisation on to being more ethical. And we also talked a little bit about the idea of, could I read about myself in a newspaper? So is what I'm about to do ethical, and would I be okay with that being on the front page of the of one of, well, newspapers is a little bit old-fashioned, maybe I should say Facebook or whatever. So yeah, those are some thoughts from our group, Nick.
Thanks, Caroline. I mean, an interesting thing that Lindsay brought up in our group is this, you know, this overwork culture. And I think it's just becoming more and more prevalent, you know, people having much, much less time, working much, much longer hours, the kind of psychological contracts breaking down. And, you know, if anything causes more unethical behaviour, it's stress, you know, time pressures, stress, not being able to necessarily think things through clearly and properly. And perhaps that's something, you know, for OD professionals to really keep an eye on, is the impact of that overwork and extensively long hours, because everybody's trying to do so much more with so much less. Okay, so we're going to move into the second activity now. So we've kind of looked like down in the detail and thought about where, you know, how does unethical behaviour, how can it show up within the kind of OD space and within the work particularly. And now kind of lifting that up a little bit and thinking about more at the organisational level and thinking about the organisational culture and climate. What we'd like to do now is break back into groups and to have a think about an organisation that you know well, and what aspects of that organisational culture are encouraging or incentivising ethical behaviour, and therefore we'd want more, obviously, of those kind of components. And what aspects of that culture or climate is facilitating unethical behaviour, and, you know, this concept of kind of perverse incentives that we might set out with a process to achieve something and quite unintentionally achieve something else. So a couple of discussion points there, again, about 10, 11 minutes or so. And I think we're going into different groups this time, Liz.
No, we thought it would be good to keep you in the same groups, because obviously
Fair enough.
otherwise you're kind of reintroducing yourselves as well, and I know that you've not had a lot of time, so you'll be in the same groups, and again we'll give you 11 minutes or so, and I'll give you a kind of warning before I bring everybody back.
Hi. Okay, I wondered, Stephen, did you join one of the groups?
I did, yes.
I wondered, would you like to share any nuggets from your session?
Yeah, a few things that we talked about. We touched briefly on data and kind of sharing data openly across the organisation, how that can encourage ethical behaviour if you know, you're really clear about where you are as an organisation, what the data's telling you, and how that's influencing your strategy going forwards. We spoke about employee networks, so having groups of staff from particular backgrounds or groups that you really kind of work closely with as an organisation, and get senior leadership kind of buy into those groups, use them to help you form policies and procedures, how that can be quite powerful, and encourage an ethical kind of culture as well.
Yeah.
And then we touched briefly at the end on kind of the pandemic and working from home, and a couple of people were saying that that's actually encouraged unethical behaviour, and people feeling overworked, and a culture where people are working all hours and work kind of feels more kind of overwhelming for people. So yeah, quite a few things there that were quite interesting.
Brilliant, thank you, Stephen. Caroline, a couple of points from yours.
Yes, a couple of points from mine, and also some things that will link in, I think, to some of the stuff that we're going to talk about in a while. So I think that one of the words that was used was inertia. And one of the ways to counteract inertia is to keep things simple. So to give people a simple framework that they can easily adopt, you know, and one of the things about being ethical is about critical thinking. And Katie talked about giving people the space to actually do some of that critical thinking, whereby they're not just constantly working on tasks and trying to get to decisions, but they're actually spending some time to actually, you know, step back and reflect and critically evaluate what's going on. And also to give an opportunity for people to speak up in a safe environment is really important. Although a lot of the organizations, people aren't using it as much as they could do. So how can you encourage people to actually raise issues? And I think one of the ways you can do that is by suggesting that, you know, we might not be able to solve this, but what we can do is show our workings out. That was a phrase that came up from Terry. We can actually show how we've approached it and how we've attempted to resolve it. And hopefully that will add to the body of knowledge that Stephen talked about, in terms of, you know, the data, and grow people's understanding of what's going on and what they could do differently next time.
Yeah. Thank you, Caroline. Just a brief point from our session, I think was really interesting though. Jade raised this point about, you know, the contagious nature of unethical behaviour and how easy it can be, you know, because of our human need to belong and our sense of wanting to belong, we can very easily get pulled into unethical behaviour, you know, unless we're feeling brave and being courageous and pushing back, that we can actually end up in that space without actually being very conscious of us doing that. So I think that was a great point from Jade. Okay, so I'll close that session off now, and I think I'm handing back to you, Caroline.
You are indeed, Nicola, but can I just pick up on what you said there? I mean, a lot of you will be familiar with the concept of groupthink, and I think that is a very, very powerful point that you've covered in your group, that it's really easy to be swept along, and, you know, not because you're a bad person, but just because you want to fit in to the group around you, and sometimes you can get sucked into stuff, and then you get deeper and deeper into it before you realize, and then of course it's really hard to climb out of it. One of my old bosses used to say, and I'm going to use a profanity here, excuse me, but he used to say, we're in the shit, but it's warm shit. And that's what quite often happens with organizations, that it's really difficult because it's cold out there once you get out of the warmth. Okay, I'm going to go back to sharing my screen now, and we're going to give you just a few more pointers about how some thoughts about what you can do practically, and then we're going to open things up for some questions and answers. I think, Liz, aren't we? That's what we're going to do next. So we wanted to share with you the approach that we take to working with leaders, and I think in our session particularly, and I'm sure it's come up in other sessions, leaders and leadership are just fundamental to the process of being more ethical, and the concept of being a good having good leadership and also good followership. I was talking to somebody a couple of weeks ago who works at the AA, and they were talking about how they're focusing quite a lot on helping people be good followers as well as being good leaders. And what we found in the work that we do is that if you want to have ethical leaders, you really need this balance of head, heart and hands, because this helps people pay attention not just to the task or to the profitability or the productivity, but also to the people aspects. So it gives people the opportunity to really kind of recognise and respond to different needs and different perspectives, and it also helps people take that approach of being able to kind of explore and examine what's really going on. And in the work that we've done, we've found that when we help people to get more of a balance, because as you can imagine, most people tend to have a preference for one or two of these areas and probably neglect one of the areas, it helps people really connect with their own beliefs and values, and it helps them focus on integrity and humility, and it's a way of creating safe spaces and building trust and psychological safety. So if you're thinking about your leadership population, then you might want to use this as a way to access more ethical behaviour. So when I first started looking at this in more detail, I came across some brilliant organisations, and the Institute of Business Ethics is a fantastic resource for lots of different ways to think about how you can practice more ethical behaviour in your organisation. And I think that somebody mentioned the pandemic just now, and Stephen was talking about working from home and the impact that has had. I think that the pandemic has really highlighted some of the best and the worst types of leadership. Some organisations have been exemplary in the way that they've treated their employees. If you look at somebody like Timpson, they have approached it in an entirely different way to an organisation perhaps like Wetherspoons, who have struggled a lot more, and obviously it's a very challenging environment for them in terms of hospitality, but the response has been a lot more kind of chaotic. And I think that Timpson are a really good example of an organisation that has some very strong ethical approach. So what the Institute of Business Ethics recommend is that a really good starting place is to really connect with what your beliefs and values are, and to provide a forum. And I think a lot of what we've been talking about in our breakout groups is about dialogue. To really provide an opportunity for people just to open up and talk about these things. You don't need to actually solve the problem. You just need to have the opportunity to share, how you feel about things, what you're thinking, what's important to you. And one of the things they suggest is this idea of an ethical manifesto. And it's something that we think can work really well as a tool to help people examine the sort of ethical dilemmas that they're facing, and to think about how you might approach that differently. So we've got a little structure that we've put together, and we'll obviously post this. It'll be part of the slide deck, but after the session, we're going to post some follow-up materials with some a bit more guidance about how to complete this and how it might work. But we know that in organizations where there is an approach like this, where there is a program where ethics have been, you know, flagged as something that's really important, you see people identify their managers as being a role model 37% more than in another organization, and they are 44% more likely to deal with ethical issues like misconduct, or to be able to tackle things before they become, you know, before they escalate and become really serious. So it's not complicated. It's it's about, you know, putting one step in front of the other. And an example might be that one of the things that I would say I really try to stand for is being truthful. However, I'm also a strong F in Myers-Briggs terms, so conflict and disharmony is very challenging for me. So I have to sometimes really struggle to be truthful in the moment. So where I'm heading is to be as truthful as I can in all situations, because what I want to deliver is a really honest feedback to the people that I'm working with, and to tell them truthfully, you know, how I'm feeling and what my observations are. So some of the things that I would do first would be to actually ask people how they would like to receive that feedback, you know, in the moment, after a meeting, you know, how would that work for them? And one of the ways that I could measure that would be to say, can you give me some feedback? You know, can you tell me now on a scale of 1 to 10 where you see me, and can we look at that again in 6 months' time? So it's a very simple and practical way, and you can start with it on an individual basis, and then it's a great way to facilitate conversations where you get a group together and say, ask everyone to share their individual manifestos, and then you look to create, you know, a team manifesto or a group manifesto or a division manifesto to help people construct it themselves. Because I think a few people have mentioned that, you know, it needs to come from the grassroots up. It needs to be something that's co-created rather than being imposed from the top down. Just to tie it back together again, I think it's really important to think about the fact that, you know, often unethical behaviour is not deliberate acts by bad people. They don't pop out, you know, with a sort of I'm a bad person on a label on them. It can be any one of us, and they can really occur even when, you know, very well-intentioned people have just become ethically blind, because, as we were talking before, you know, that it's something that has warmed up around them and they've not really noticed until it gets, you know, quite serious. And one of the ways you can prevent that happening is to develop this idea of ethical sensitivity. So by really getting, you know, particularly your leadership group to connect with the beliefs and values that drive them, then you can see that panning out for the rest of the organization. So, you know, we know that being ethical isn't easy, but I think that based on the conversations we've had tonight, it's something that we really, really want to aspire to. So I think we're going to go to some questions.
Yeah, let's go to some questions. I'm very aware as well that other people haven't had a chance to feedback from the exercises, so I guess this is a bit of open time for you. We've not had any questions in the chat. Perhaps we could start off, Caroline, with the question that was we've just had one actually, but perhaps we could start with the one that was submitted and then give people a chance to think. But if anyone even wants to comment on the discussions in their breakouts, or you know, has a challenge that you want to share sensitively. Obviously we are recording, so just reminder that we don't want to be sharing any confidential information. So perhaps, Caroline, if we go to the question that was submitted first, and then we'll go to Amelia's question in the chat, and then we'll open it up more broadly.
Okay. And I know the questions that were submitted, I haven't got it quite in front of me, but it was along the lines of what I remember I mean, it was a really powerful question, and I really
why don't we do Amelia's first, and I'll get the exact wording up in front of us.
So do that. Yeah.
So
okay.
Amelia was talking about
Amelia's. So Amelia's question is, how do you transition from an unethical organisation to an ethical one? What would be the key steps? Brilliant question. Okay, so and I'll just say a few words, and then I'll give the opportunity for anyone else to chip in case there's some other great ideas. I think that the starting point that I would where I would start working with an organisation is, you know, what's the outcome that you're looking for? Why is being ethical important to you? How is it going to add value to, you know, your day-to-day life, to your longer term, you know, to your longer term goals as an organization? And we use a 3-step process. We say, what are the quick wins that you're looking for? So how would being more ethical give you benefits on a quick wins basis? What are some of the longer term goals that would be important to you about being more ethical? And then what's the sustainable plan? So where is this taking you longer term? And those 3 levels can help you see the extent to which people might actually be signed up to this. Because the other key thing I would say is, you know, this is like pushing water uphill if you have not got buy-in from some of your key stakeholders. So I think that conversation can help you connect with the who's actually on board here. And if you've got everyone on board, brilliant. But if you haven't, then at least you've got some areas of quick wins that you can work with the people that really are on board and want to make a difference. So that would be my suggestion. Anyone else want to add anything to that?
Caroline, maybe if we just take the slide down and put everyone on gallery view, and then people can just take themselves off unmute if they do want to contribute. Please just go ahead, because we've got quite a few people on the screen, so it's hard to see if people have got their hands up. We'll just give people a couple of moments, and then I'll go on to the next question. We were asked, what if you had to choose to lie for the ease of your team or confess a truth that will make you personally feel uncomfortable, but you know could be a better in terms of everyone else's conscience? It says, very honestly, I chose the second choice, but I've been wondering if it was worth it.
I found that very profound in terms of the experience that somebody has been through there, because I think that what it demonstrates is that being ethical, or certainly sticking to your values and beliefs, can sometimes be a very lonely place. And this is why a lot of people really struggle with it, because you know, that takes a lot of courage, and there can be unintended consequences and fallout from this idea of being honest. So there are a few things that it made me think about in terms of the question. So first of all, I think it shows what, you know, it's messy, it's not clean, it's not like this is being ethical and this is being unethical. It's a massive kind of grey area, no man's land, if you like, where you've got to constantly be negotiating, and that's why open dialogue and setting aside time and getting people to think more critically about what's going on is really important. I also think, you know, if you ask the question, have you ever met somebody who calls themselves a liar? I don't think many of us will have met somebody that goes around saying, oh, yeah, by the way, I'm the one that lies all the time. However, we know that most of us tell multiple white lies on a daily basis because it makes our lives easier. And some of that's okay, some of that's perfectly acceptable because it's about the social norms and it's about not rocking the boat, and but there comes a point when actually it transitions from being a white lie that kind of everyone accepts to being something that is unethical. So knowing where that threshold is really important, and that's the concept of ethical sensitivity, where you actually pay attention to the moments that matter in terms of connecting with what happens to you emotionally. So I'm wondering if this person actually experienced some of those very powerful emotions and that's what drove them to take this risk. But you can always come back from that, even if it has been difficult, even if you have called out something and the rest of your team have struggled with that. There are ways back from that in terms of, sitting down either one-to-one or in small groups and talking through, Nick has done a lot of work around, mediation and actually finding what the common ground is. What can we agree on? And I think that's a really powerful way to move forward. Nick, I don't know if you want to say anything about that.
No, I think you're right, Caroline. I think often we end up in very strong positions, and actually what we should be doing is looking for principled kind of negotiation, not necessarily hard positions about things, because there will be, if we look hard enough, common ground and common understanding of things. And I think the dialogue piece is really, really critical in this space, because we can't train ethics into people. You don't train people to be ethical. It's about a kind of a constant greater understanding and awareness and realization of things, and compassion and empathy and understanding for other people's views and positions within the world as well.
Thank you both. I'm just wondering whether anyone else has anything they'd like to share from the breakouts, or any other questions or challenges people would want to discuss in this forum. Please feel free to just take yourselves off mute and ask a question. We'll give people a couple of moments. If you don't want to ask, or your tech isn't allowing you to speak, or you're in somewhere where it's noisy, please feel free to pop any questions that you have in the chat.
And also, sorry, Rachel's coming in. I was just going to say that, you can follow up as well and ask us afterwards if it's not appropriate now. Sorry, Rachel, were you going to chip in?
Yes, I was just going to say, I think so much of the conversation today around ethical leadership and what enables a culture that enables and encourages ethical behaviour, so much is about having a sort of psychologically safe environment, and which we talk about in other contexts as well, and about feeling able to admit mistakes, feeling able to admit uncertainty, particularly as a leader. I think being able to do that, and then how that has a ripple effect. But also, if we have a culture that doesn't permit that, if the behavior that we're sort of demanding and the pressures that we're putting on by setting high targets, or unrealistic targets. There's nothing wrong with a high target that challenges, but when we create that kind of fearful environment, then we again we move people in that direction. So I suppose I'm seeing today the real connections with some of those other things that we've been exploring in other contexts.
That's brilliant. You're absolutely spot on, Rachel. I think this whole idea of speaking up really relies on trust, doesn't it? And also there's a huge vulnerability in saying, I want to be ethical, but I don't know if I can be ethical. It's a real challenge to be ethical, because it is such a movable feast. I mean, what was ethical yesterday might not be ethical tomorrow, because it's very, very dynamic. So yeah, I love the way you've joined the dots up there.
Okay, anyone else want to unmute themselves and ask a question or make a comment on what's been discussed? Nicola, I think you had something, didn't you? Did you have something else that you wanted to ask?
Yeah, I wondered whether, Caroline, it'd be helpful to talk just a little bit about the differences between, you know, when we think about traditional leadership development and then we think about development around ethical leadership. What do you see as some of the kind of differences there? You know, what would be, and as Rachel said, you know, this isn't about just as a leader being ethical yourself, but it's about the creating of the conditions for others to be ethical as well, and the power of role modeling, etc. I just wondered if it'd be helpful to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think that this, you know, we've all experienced something really fundamental over the last almost, you know, 18 months, 2 years. And I think it's really highlighted a shift that is needed in leadership. And this, you know, one of the weaknesses of the command and control, heroic leader, you know, powerful, usually white male, unfortunately, leader is it's very outdated, and it's very difficult to be ethical, truly ethical, because you're relying on one person's view of the world. And so I think that a lot of the shift in leadership development is to move to a much more democratic approach, much more of a shared leadership model, whereby, yes, you will have one person who's going to be the person who ultimately decides which direction you're going to go in, but that you actually extend the, you know, the dialogue to everyone in the group. And the role of the leader is about, you know, engaging people in that dialogue and empowering them to speak up and looking for solutions from across the leadership group, not just relying on, you know, one or two people, but democratizing it really in terms of the approach to leadership and making it much more consultative and collaborative. And yeah, that's certainly where we're going in terms of the approach we're taking to leadership.
Great. Okay, well, thank you. I'm aware that we've only got the last 5 minutes of the session left. So if anyone has got any other questions that you've not had a chance to ask, please do pop them in the chat, and we will make sure that they are answered and the information is shared. So I'll just give you a minute also to wrap up, Caroline, and then I'll just point people in the direction of what's happening next.
Thank you. And I really appreciate everyone staying on and people's participation, because it has been really powerful. And as I said at the beginning, I'm so involved in this that I'm doing my doctorate on it. So hearing some of your thoughts and ideas has been absolutely brilliant. So just to finish off, you know, Nick and I, as Liz said, Nick and I work together, and we're really looking at a different kind of approach to leadership development. And these are the sort of key areas that we focus on. And I think one thing to mention is we really want to give people the chance to step away, to reflect. I think it was Katie in my group talked about giving people the time. So we've come up with this idea of creating leadership retreats, and we're working with Humble by Nature, you know, Kate Humble's organisation, to provide that opportunity. And I think the other really important thing is about enabling people, giving them the skills to have really open, trusting dialogue that makes them, you know, that might make them feel vulnerable, but actually moves them forward. So we're involved in this work, and we absolutely love working in this area. So thank you for giving us this opportunity, and Liz is just going to close up now.
Yeah, and your passion comes through. So thank you to both of you for coming along with us. If you can just move on to the next slide. Yeah. I just want to remind everybody that our annual conference for the CIPD is happening at the beginning of November. So please register for your free exhibition pass if you haven't already. For the OD group, we will be having our next session on the 25th of November, and that's going to be all about how do you manage organic change that's ongoing in a way that your teams are really going to welcome that change. We know that there's so much going on at the moment that teams are a little bit kind of change weary, and it's about managing change in an empowering way that people are really going to welcome. So that's another exciting session. I've loved this conversation tonight about ethics. It'd be good to delve into it in more detail. So, you know, perhaps Caroline and Nicola will come back and join us again later on. Or perhaps, Caroline, once you've done your thesis, you know, maybe you could come and
I bet everyone wants to read that.
Well, I wasn't going to suggest you read it out, but it would be lovely to share.
You have to read it and I'll test you.
Okay, I shall do that. Thank you, everybody. Have a good rest of your evening. Please do fill in the feedback survey, and if there are any particular topics that you want us to cover, please either get in contact with me direct, post something on our LinkedIn or website, but do let us know, because otherwise we don't know the topics that you're interested in. So let's show our appreciation to Caroline and to Nicola. I'm going to give them a clap. So anyone else want to use?
I'm doing a high five.
High five. Okay, high five back. It's a bit difficult. It's going dark. I'm getting darker and darker.
Yeah.
We will post some materials on the website. So thanks, everybody. And as I say, get in contact if you've got any questions.
If anybody'd like to have a closer look at this sketch note, we will send out a copy afterwards. But you could also go to the top. If you go to the top right-hand corner of your screen and put it on speaker view, that will bring it up.
Thank you for reminding me about that, Rachel. That's great.
And then you can have a look at it. But I will take a copy, and it will come out in the material.
It's absolutely wonderful.
We'll absolutely share it on social media. Thank you for doing that, Rachel. It's beautiful as always.